Romania is facing an uncertain political future after its top court annulled the country's presidential election. It claims Russian interference after a far-right candidate saw a surge in votes. So, where does this leave democracy in Romania? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, 2 days before the second round of voting, Romania's presidential election was cancelled by its top court. The controversial move followed allegations Russia was using TikTok to support a far-right candidate.
It was an election meant to shape Romania's future. Instead, it caused political chaos. In an unprecedented move, Romania's election result was cancelled by its constitutional court, on national security grounds over fears of interference from Russia. Far-right candidate Georgescu had unexpectedly secured the most votes after the first round. Romanian intelligence claimed TikTok bot accounts linked to the Russian government helped promote Georgescu.
I only wanted good. I have no connection to anything that says it is with Russia. I am Romanian, first and foremost.
Russia denies any interference in the election. Political parties from both sides are frustrated at the election being annulled. Pro-EU candidate Lasconi trailed behind her rival in the first vote, but still wanted the second round to go ahead.
This is the moment when the Romanian state trampled on democracy. God, truth, Romanian people and the law will prevail. It's not about me. The economy is collapsing. You are destroying democracy. You are leading the country into anarchy. We should have gone ahead with the vote.
Another election will be rerun next year. But Romania's current president, Klaus Iohannis, will need to step down as his term ends. Ambiguity is all Romania has.
It's uncertain and we don't know which direction it's going, which scares us.
The whole process will be rerun in 2025 as doubts over Romania's democracy hang heavy. So where does the country go from here?
Well, let's meet our guests. Here with me in the studio is Cristian Nitoiu. He is Senior Lecturer in Diplomacy and International Governance. That's at Loughborough University in the United Kingdom. Corina Lacatus is Senior Lecturer at the School of Politics and International Relations at Queen Mary University in London. And I'm delighted to say we have with us again the former UK Liberal Democrat politician Lembit Opik. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Corina, I'll come to you first. People are watching on with amazement at what's been going on in Romania. So a country that traditionally is very anti-Russian, and now you've suddenly got a guy who has called Vladimir Putin a patriot, and he wins the election.
Yes, I think it's fair to say that the events of the past almost 3 weeks now in Romania have sent shockwaves through Romanian society and the Romanian political class. I think everybody's surprised, including, I would say, the campaign team of the far-right politician Georgescu at the electoral success that he's had in the first round of the presidential election. Also, the annulment of the election has caused surprise as well. And I think what is interesting, and just speaking to what you noted on Romania traditionally being a pro-European country, I think the political discourse and the public discourse on the election, around the election, has changed a bit, the tone, the general direction of political discourse on pro-European or anti-European discourse. Traditionally, Romania has always been pro-European in the almost 35 years of democracy. And I think with this election, we're hearing more the kind of pro-European, anti-European. So it's changed from far to right, kind of left-wing, right-wing politics to more pro-European, anti-European, which is more characteristic of maybe the kind of political discourse you hear in Republic of Moldova or possibly in other Central European countries and Eastern European countries now.
Let's bring Cristian in. Cristian, give us your take on how this guy came from pretty much nowhere to winning an election.
Yeah, well, I have to say it's been an emotional roller coaster for me. I'm quite tired now after witnessing what's been happening in the last 3 weeks. I think there were different groups inside the country, but also outside the country, working on his image on social media for at least the last, let's say, 4 to 5 years. And there was an avalanche of support on TikTok and other social media for him. And one of the reasons for why the elections were canceled was because apparently his campaign broke the election funding rules, because he declared that actually he didn't spend any sort of funding on this. But at the same time, all of the activity that was done on TikTok shows that actually a lot of money was put into creating this swell of support for him. But I don't think it's fair to say that he actually came from nowhere, because 4 years ago, he was one of the key people that was supported by the main far-right party for the position of prime minister. So people knew about him, but most people, I think, in their social media bubbles, those who are very pro-European, they didn't have any information about him. But the other, I would say the silent majority in the country who doesn't really care about politics, who's very much disenchanted with the state of politics in the last 30 years, those were the target of his campaign. And he had very clear messages that attracted them. One is around, let's say, what is the role of Romania in the European Union, and the fact that there are a lot of people in Romania who think that membership in the European Union has not really paid off for them personally, because they were expecting that their life would become better. There's another group of people who are very much into kind of new age thinking, mysticism, and he's played on that. So there are on social media, there are a lot of groups where people talk about how looking at the sun can heal various illnesses. And then there's the issue of Ukraine. And I think most people who voted for him are a bit fatigued by the idea of having a war on the border. So he talked about bringing peace.
Lembit, to you, what's your take on the cancelling of this election result? Was it the right thing to do?
I don't think so. I understand the argument that maybe other people paid the money on his behalf. I don't think he paid it. But actually, it's something of a sham, in my opinion. Why? Because, first of all, he clearly represents, as my colleagues have indicated, a groundswell of support. And that cannot be denied. The second reason is because, actually, as you've already heard, people live in an echo chamber. Pro-Europeans don't know much about him because they choose their news in pro-European environments. And so he's almost invisible. That's a problem in British politics as well, by the way. And the third thing is that when you look at the outcome, it's not really a surprise if you put your ear to the ground in that area. I spent a lot of time next door to Romania in Bulgaria, and I would say 3/4 of the population and 2/3 of the parliament are quite pro-Russian, whatever that means. So it's not really that surprising that their immediate neighbour feels the same, partly because of the war. Many people there feel that it's a war against relatives, essentially. So put all that together, and sure, they can try to annul the election, but my prediction is he will come back stronger, because people don't like it when an election is annulled, when their chosen person has a perceived majority. It feels unfair. So I think he'll actually strengthen his position.
Corina, do you think this will backfire then on the Romanian public and the Romanian leadership, that by cancelling the elections, they're just empowering Georgescu to come back in 2025 even stronger?
In all fairness, I think right now it's really hard to predict which way the chips are going to fall. There's a state of confusion in Romanian society overall and in political class as well. I do think that it's fair to say the far right has been, and I agree with us, the far right has actually been on the rise, at least in the past 5 years. Georgescu himself was actually a member of the party. He was actually the selected potential candidate as prime minister for that particular party in 2022. And that party formed largely by mobilizing support online in 2019, and it's become ever stronger since. And there are some other smaller parties that are kind of in the same far-right spectrum as well. So I think there is a risk in the future, depending on how credible the new coalition that the pro-European parties are forming at the moment is, and how much they're able to win the trust of the population. There is a risk that in the future the far-right would actually grow stronger.
Cristian, whatever the merits of this argument that a lot of foreign interference came in, TikTok and money exchanging hands with influencers to promote Georgescu, clearly what he was saying resonated with Romanians. A lot of Romanians liked what they were hearing.
Yes, I mean, we had more than 2 million Romanians going out to vote for him. And yeah, if you believe, well, if you are in favor of the argument that there was foreign intervention and that was the main reason for why he got elected, that doesn't explain why people actually voted, because it wasn't bots on TikTok or Facebook voting. It was actually humans in the flesh voting. But I think at the core of his message is the idea that Romania has been on a wrong path from his perspective in the last 30 years. So embracing European ideas wholly without in any way changing the European Union in itself. So he's arguing that Romanians are rule takers rather than rule makers. So we're adopting a lot of things from the European Union, but we're not able to influence anything significantly. He sometimes uses the phrase that we're the slaves of Europe. And he promised that he will go into the European Union or NATO on a strong position and negotiate something that is in Romania's interest. But by the way, he always talks in very general terms. When he's asked, okay, can you give us a few more details about it? What are you actually going to negotiate? He's saying, well, I believe in God and God will guide me. And this is a very important aspect as well, because a lot of Romanians who vote for him tend to be quite fervent Christian Orthodox. Well, they also tend to go to church. So appealing to God has been very important for him. I think some people see him as the savior.
So tell me, how will these people feel then if he's in the runoff and there's a rerun of the election again in 2025? Lembit's point that this guy will just snowball in popularity. Is that going to happen?
Well, first of all, I don't think the Constitutional Court will allow him to stand in elections again. There's a precedent where another very prominent right-wing nationalist politician was excluded from the elections, Diana Șoșoacă. So I'm quite convinced that the Constitutional Court will do the same. If it doesn't do the same, then in some way it loses all of its legitimacy, because it did the same on, let's say, weaker allegations than you have now. Even now, I think it's very difficult, as Lambert said. All of the allegations are quite circumstantial. It's very difficult to pin him down and create a clear link between the money that was spent on TikTok and his own campaign.
Lembit, how much of a problem is TikTok then for the European Union? You know, they've got this new digital act trying to regulate, and you've got a situation like this, if we believe it, that TikTok has basically propelled one man from the fringes to the presidency.
It's a problem because the European Union has made it into a problem. Why do we talk about TikTok and not Facebook or X and all these other things? All kinds of difficulties have been created, in my view, by the Romanian establishment. The point made about him potentially being excluded seems desperately undemocratic to me. It's not like this candidate had some great power to make TikTok work. Others may have been on his side. But look at the precedents here. We've got, in America, we had Labour activists from the UK going and interfering on Kamala Harris's side. Not successfully, but they did it. The precedents have been set there. And why doesn't that invalidate, for example, the Democratic campaign over there? A deeper issue here. We're making it sound like Romania's an exception. It's not. We've got Hungary with the same movement, you say, the far right. We've got Bulgaria, which is often in turmoil, but it's also essentially not keen on the direction the European Union is taking with foreign policy. So if you look at it in isolation, maybe you can try and stop this one candidate. But this far right movement, I would describe slightly differently. It's a reaction by the general public against what they feel is being shoved down their throats by a pseudo-egalitarian Brussels elite, if you like. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not propagandizing there, but that's what I hear in Bulgaria. That's what I hear from some of my colleagues in Romania. And it's a foolish approach to try to stop the voice of that and think that the problem goes away.
So tell me, Corina, what were the issues then in Romania that he tapped into? We know already that he's very religious, and a lot of people like that, and they vote according to their faith, and they like seeing this guy go to church and pray.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm guessing Ukraine and the economy.
Yes, you're correct. I think there's several factors that can explain the support that he got in the first round of the presidential elections. I think before I speak about religion, if I may, there is a general dissatisfaction with inflation in the economy in Romania at the moment. And I think all countries that have had elections this year have actually seen incumbents lose. And that's irrespective of the alternative that he offers politically. There's a disillusionment with the political class that's been in power for 35 years at the moment. Also, he's tapped into some sort of nostalgia of a past that Romania, a golden past that Romania enjoyed at some point during the sort of 2 world wars, and they tapped into basically a far-right anti-Semitic discourse. At the time, there was anti-communist and pro-fascist, really.
And people like this? People
I wouldn't say
welcome
the
this?
majority of the people like this, but
his
this,
supporters?
Yes, and demonstrations in support of the far-right, in the sort of fascist memories, right, that Romania has in the past, have actually taken place over the years, officially, publicly in Romania, yes. They're not the majority, though, yes.
Cristian, I noticed the budget deficit in Romania is the highest in the European Union, 8%. That is clearly an issue for whatever happens in the year to come. What was his take on the economy then? What was his solution, or what was he offering?
Well, again, he almost never offers specific solution, but he did tap into this idea that we've become indebted to the West, and then we don't have any agency because of that. Things are being thrust upon Romanians because we've become indebted. And that, in some way, I think, reminds people of the late communist period, when the former leader, dictator at the time, had this idea that Romania should play a major role in the world and should be independent, self-sufficient. And at the time, Romania was very much indebted because it used a lot of loans in order to finance the industrialization of the country, and then he decided to pay them back. So people who are nostalgic about that period would remember that this is the same discourse that they were hearing in the 1980s. But he's also arguing that actually he's going to bring a lot of investment from different parts of the world. We don't only need to engage with European partners or American partners, but we should open ourselves up to the whole world. And that would allow us to develop economically. And then he very frequently gives the example of Hungary and Poland, who have done the same, or Serbia, have opened themselves to investment from the Gulf states, from China, for example. And I think for some people, this is quite appealing, again, because they're thinking, okay, the European Union hasn't delivered anything tangible in my life. Maybe these ideas, why don't we give them a try and see where we go? But by the way, just one point about what the people who elected him want. I hear very often on social media now people saying that, look, if we don't vote for the right person, our vote doesn't matter. That's the message that they got. And they're thinking that there are double standards. And I remember in terms of election financing, 8 months ago, one of the other candidates from one of the pro-European party had a large campaign, which happened before the actual electoral campaign, where there were, I think, thousands of posters on the main roads and highways in the country publicizing his new book. And actually, people were measuring the distance between cities in terms of the number of posters rather than the number of kilometers. So as you can see, these kind of, I think, small jokes actually play into the way in which people view the current establishment.
Lembit, just tell me, I'm getting a sentiment here that Romanians feel they've been failed by the European Union. How much is Brussels at fault here, then?
Very largely. I think that the European Union has a big problem now because even though it's invested billions in some countries, the public doesn't feel that a good highway is a substitute for autonomy, for a feeling of independence. And everyone in this room would agree that the Romanian economy is in a bit of trouble because of the large deficit. And it's quite easy to blame Brussels because it looks a little bit like a dictatorship at times. So I think that Brussels really is actually sleepwalking into a nightmare by, for example, rubbishing the AfD in Germany, by seeming to want to undermine Le Pen and National Rally in France. And when you look at it, there's a strategic problem here because a lot of people are fed up with a direction which I might describe as a left-wing elite taking the whole of the European Union in a direction lots of people don't want to go. Now, I don't tend to use the word far-right because I just think that in itself is loaded. The public don't spend all their time talking about politics, but they feel it when they're not happy. And that's why it's so dangerous to try to use political trickery to oppress a voice like his in Romania.
Corina, when this comes around and there is another runoff, Elena Lasconi is likely to be the favourite. How do you think she will fare if Georgescu does end up on the ballot paper as well?
We don't know yet that Lasconi will be proposed. There have been several names circulated at the moment. If Lasconi, in the scenario that Lasconi does run again, I think it will be her success will depend largely on how credible the coalition of parties that support her are going to be perceived to be by the public in the coming months. So it's largely dependent on how the traditional kind of quote-unquote mainstream parties manage to gain or to regain public trust, I think.
Cristian, just talk to me about the demographics. I'm intrigued about the social media aspect to this election campaign. We keep hearing TikTok being mentioned. In my world, TikTok is for teenagers, very young people. They're not interested in old men politicians.
I used to think that as well, but there have been a few analyses in the last few weeks showing that he has support on TikTok from a wide demographics. Obviously, young people were voting for him because they were very much appealing to the ideas of late communism that I mentioned, the idea that Romania can play this major role in the world. Actually, he spent, I think, quite a few sessions talking to his supporter about how Romania actually opened the first Palestinian embassy. So that was an example of how Romania was willing and dealing in the world. But I think a lot of people from different social classes, with different levels of education, voted for him. And they basically voted as a way of rejecting the current mainstream political environment where they feel that their voice is not heard. By the way, a large number of Romanians living in Western European countries voted for him because they feel that they have to leave the country because there weren't enough opportunities for them. And it's the same people over and over coming and trying to get elected from the mainstream party. So they want to see a change. And in some way, he represents that change. And TikTok, I think, because he's not very specific in what he says, he has these very powerful bite-sized messages. I think that makes him very appealing. And I guess people's attention span is very small now. And I don't think most people who voted for him would like more details. I don't think they care.
I'm hearing Lembit laugh here. Lembit, this is a recurring theme, isn't it, in politics now? Yeah. Lots of angry men, very few solutions, but they're fantastic on social media.
It's the charisma thing. Nigel Farage with Reform UK did spectacularly well from a standing start, really, in the British election. It pretty much destroyed the Conservative Party for a while. We've got Donald Trump, another charismatic character there. Despite everything that was thrown at him, the public said, no, we want this man. I think the same's happening in Romania. Now, let's just be clear. No election is won or lost because of TikTok or Twitter or X, as it's now called. Those are loudspeakers, but they're not the voice. And if you're smart with these loudspeakers, you get your message across. I have to say, one takeaway for me is I've got to learn how to use TikTok because maybe that's how I get elected again. But just blaming TikTok is to ignore the problem. The problem's deep-seated here. The people are fed up with the establishment, not just in Romania, but in the UK, in Germany, in France, well, not in Hungary, because they actually like the establishment there.
And in Brussels as well.
And in Brussels, and that's the problem. As I said before, they're sleepwalking into a problem they've created themselves.
Corina, just a final point. I mean, Romania's future is obviously very much as part of the European Union, regardless who becomes president.
Yes, I don't think that, at least in the near future, we're going to see any kind of Romania exit. But I do think that the relationship with Brussels will may change depending on the direction that the next coalition government will take the country in.
And give me your prediction for 2025. Will we hear more of Cal and Georgescu?
Yes, at the very least, in terms of court cases and legal cases that he himself has, begun, and also that the prosecutors will likely raise against him as well. But he will remain a leader in his sort of sphere of influence. Whether or not he will be an influential politician again, I doubt it, actually, but yes.
Just Cristian, a prediction from you. What can you see happening with this man and the future of Romania next year?
I think it's hard to say, but if you look at mainstream media now, they only have criticism for him. So they spend like hours and hours in prime time talking about his links with right-wing groups, with mercenaries. So I think in any way that's emboldening his supporters. But I don't think the Constitutional Court, the intelligence community can afford to allow him to run again, because in a way that will nullify everything that they've done. But I also think that it might be some time until we have the next round of elections. I don't think the authorities are in a position to organize elections now and make sure, be able to say that they've organized them in a secure manner, so that what happened now in terms of the allegations of external interference would not happen again. So the current president might stay in power for the next 6 months at least.
We'll keep across it. Cristian, Corina and Lembit all here in the studio with me. Thank you all. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.